Thomas Caldwell stood at the window of his ranch house, watching the first snow of November dust the Montana plains. At 58, he'd grown accustomed to the silence. The ranch that once echoed with laughter now held only the wind's whisper and the occasional lowing of cattle. His wife, Margaret, had passed 7 years ago. Their daughter, Claire, lived in Seattle now, busy with her own family. She called every Sunday, but Thomas could hear the guilt in her voice when she had to cut their conversations short. He didn't blame her. Life moved forward. That's what it did. That afternoon, Thomas drove into town for supplies. The general store buzzed with the usual Saturday chatter. Mrs. Henderson was restocking shelves when he walked in. "Thomas," she called out, her voice carrying concern. "Have you heard about the young widow staying at the church?" Thomas selected a bag of coffee beans, half listening. "Her name's Sarah Monroe," Mrs. Henderson continued. "She's got a little boy, maybe 8 or 9. They've been sleeping in their car for 3 nights now. Broke down on their way to her sister's place in Idaho." Thomas set down the coffee. "In this weather? Pastor Jim's been trying to help, but you know how it is. The church heating system's been out for a week." Mrs. Henderson leaned closer. "That little boy has a cough that doesn't sound good." Thomas left the store with more than supplies. He drove to the white chapel at the edge of town, where a dusty sedan sat in the parking lot, its windows fogged from the inside. He found Pastor Jim in his office. "Tell me about the widow and her son." 20 minutes later, Thomas pulled his truck alongside the sedan. Through the window, he saw a woman in her early 30s, wrapped in a thin coat, holding a sleeping boy against her chest. Her blonde gray hair fell loose around tired but kind eyes. The child's face was flushed with fever. Thomas tapped gently on the window. The woman startled, instinctively tightening her hold on her son. Thomas stepped back, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. She cracked the window an inch. "Yes?" "My name's Thomas Caldwell. I own a ranch about 15 miles from here. Pastor Jim told me about your situation." He kept his voice soft, unthreatening. "I have a guest house. It's warm, clean, and empty. You and your boy are welcome to stay until you get back on your feet." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "We can't. I can't pay you. I'm not asking you to. Why would you do this for strangers?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Because someone should. And because I have the space." Sarah looked down at her sleeping son, then back at Thomas. In his weathered face, she saw only sincerity. "His name is Ethan," she said softly. "He's 9. He has asthma and this cold isn't helping. Then let's get him somewhere warm." The guest house sat 50 yards from the main ranch house. It had been Margaret's pottery studio once, converted years ago for visiting family who rarely came. Thomas unlocked the door and switched on the lights. The space was modest but comfortable, a main room with a kitchenette, a bedroom and a bathroom. Sarah carried Ethan inside, and Thomas could see the relief wash over her face at the warmth. "There's firewood stacked outside," Thomas said. "Pantry's stocked with basics. If you need anything else, the main house is just across the way. I'll leave my number on the counter." "Mr. Caldwell," Sarah began, but he raised a hand. "Thomas, just Thomas." He tipped his hat. "Get some rest. We can talk more tomorrow." That night, Thomas sat in his own kitchen staring at his untouched dinner. He wasn't sure what had compelled him to bring strangers onto his property, but when he'd seen that little boy's flushed face, pressed against his mother's coat, something in his chest had tightened. Maybe it was remembering Claire at that age, when she'd had pneumonia, and Margaret had held her through fevered nights. Maybe it was just tired of being alone with his ghosts. The next morning, Thomas woke early as always. He did his rounds with the cattle, mended a section of fence, and by 9 o'clock found himself standing at the guest house door with a bag of groceries. Sarah answered, looking more rested. "You didn't have to do this. Thought you might need fresh milk for the boy. How's he doing?" "Better." The warmth helped. "His breathing's easier." She hesitated. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" They sat at the small table while Ethan slept in the bedroom. Sarah told him pieces of her story, how her husband, Daniel, had died in a construction accident 2 years ago, how she'd tried to make it work in Oklahoma, but the medical bills had buried her, how her sister in Idaho had offered them a fresh start. "Then the car's transmission went," Sarah said quietly. "I had just enough money for food, but not for repairs. I thought we could make it to Idaho somehow, but then the weather turned." Thomas listened without interruption. He'd learned over the years that sometimes people didn't need advice. They just needed to be heard. "The church ladies have been kind," Sarah continued, "but I know they're struggling too. I can't keep taking charity." She met his eyes. "If you'll let us stay for a few weeks, I can work. I can cook, clean, help with whatever you need around the ranch. You don't owe me work for shelter." "Maybe not, but I need to owe something I can pay back." Her voice was firm despite its gentleness. "I need to feel useful. And Ethan needs to see that we contribute, that we earn our way. It matters." Thomas understood pride. He respected it. "All right. If you want to help, I won't say no. I usually cook for myself, but I'll admit it's mostly beans and eggs. If you enjoy cooking, I won't complain about better meals." A small smile touched Sarah's lips. "I do enjoy cooking. I used to bake pies for Daniel's work crew every Friday. They said it was the highlight of their week." Over the following days, a rhythm developed. Sarah would bring dinner to the main house each evening, and they'd eat together at Thomas's old kitchen table. Ethan, recovering quickly, would tell Thomas about his school back in Oklahoma, about his favorite subjects and the books he loved to read. The boy was bright and curious. He asked Thomas about the ranch, about the cattle, about the mountains in the distance. Thomas found himself answering with more words than he'd spoken in months. One evening, Ethan asked, "Were you always a rancher?" "Mostly. My father had this place before me. I grew up here, thought I'd leave once, but the land has a way of keeping you." Thomas paused. "I was a teacher for a few years, though. High school history." "Why'd you stop?" "My father got sick. Someone needed to run the ranch. After he passed, I just stayed." "Do you miss teaching?" Thomas considered this. "Sometimes. I miss the questions young people ask. They see the world differently, make you think about things you'd stopped noticing." Sarah smiled from across the table. "Sounds like Ethan. He never stops asking questions." "Good," Thomas said. "Curious minds are the best kind." As December arrived, the snow deepened. Sarah's car had been towed to town, where the mechanic delivered bad news. The repairs would cost more than the car was worth. Sarah took the news quietly, but Thomas saw the defeat in her shoulders. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Sarah sat on the guest house porch despite the cold. Thomas saw her from his window and, after a moment's hesitation, grabbed 2 mugs of hot chocolate and walked over. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing her a mug. "Thank you." She wrapped her hands around it. "I called my sister today. Told her we might not make it to Idaho after all." Thomas settled into the chair beside her. "What did she say?" She understood. "She's been struggling too. Her husband lost his job last month." Sarah's breath misted in the cold air. "I don't know what I'm going to do, Thomas. I can't impose on your kindness forever." "You're not imposing." "I am. You've been so generous, but I need to stand on my own feet. For Ethan's sake. For my own." They sat in silence, watching the stars emerge through breaks in the clouds. "There's a school in town," Thomas said finally. "They were looking for a teacher's aide last I heard. Doesn't pay much, but it's something. And the schools here always need volunteers. If Ethan enrolled, you'd be nearby." Sarah turned to him. "You think they'd hire me?" "I know the principal. I could put in a word." "Why do you keep helping us?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "When my wife died, this place got real quiet. Too quiet. Then Claire moved away, and it got quieter still. I told myself I was fine with it, that solitude was just part of getting older." He looked at Sarah. "But these past few weeks with you and Ethan here, the house feels alive again." I hear laughter. "I have conversations that aren't with the dog. I remember what it's like to be part of something bigger than just getting through the day." Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks. "We've been a burden everywhere we've gone. People meant well, but we always felt like charity cases. Here you've made us feel like we matter. Like we belong." "You do belong, as long as you want to stay." By January, Sarah had the job at the school. It was part-time, but combined with state assistance and Thomas's generosity with rent, they were managing. Ethan thrived in his new school, making friends and bringing home drawings he'd made in art class. Thomas's ranch became their home in ways none of them had expected. On weekends, Ethan would follow Thomas around the property, learning about ranching, helping with small chores. Thomas taught him to ride, started him on a gentle mare named Honey. Sarah transformed the main house with small touches, curtains in the windows, fresh flowers on the table, the smell of bread baking on Sunday mornings. She never overstepped, always asking before changing anything. But Thomas found himself saying yes to everything. The house needed life. She was giving it back. One February evening, Claire called. Thomas told her about Sarah and Ethan, expecting, he wasn't sure what. Judgment, maybe, concern about strangers on the property. Instead, Claire said, "Dad, you sound happy, really happy. When can I meet them?" Thomas realized she was right. He was happy. Claire visited in March, bringing her husband and 2 children. Ethan and Claire's kids bonded immediately, running through the house in a chaos of laughter. Sarah and Claire clicked over coffee, talking about books and children and the challenges of single parenthood. For Sarah's widowhood and Claire's busy household had their own struggles in common. Before leaving, Claire hugged her father tight. "She's good for you, Dad. This is good for you." "We're just friends," Thomas said. "I know, but you're not alone anymore. That's what matters." As spring arrived, melting the snow and revealing green beneath, Thomas found himself thinking about the future differently. He'd assumed his life would continue as it had. Quiet, solitary, peaceful in its way, but lonely in others. Now his mornings included breakfast with Ethan before school. His evenings meant dinners with conversation. His weekends held laughter and purpose beyond just maintaining the ranch. One April evening, Sarah and Thomas sat on the main house porch, watching Ethan play with the ranch dog in the yard. "I've been saving," Sarah said. "The school offered me full-time hours starting next fall. I should be able to afford rent on a place in town by summer." Thomas's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "That's wonderful, Sarah. You've worked hard for this." "I have, and I'm grateful for everything you've done. You gave us a chance when we had nothing." She paused. "But I'd like to ask you something." "Anything?" "What if we stayed? Not as charity, as renters. I could pay fair rent for the guest house. Ethan loves it here. I love it here." She turned to him. "And I think maybe you like having us around, too." Thomas felt something loosen in his chest. "I do, very much." "Then can we stay? As a real arrangement, tenant and landlord?" Thomas looked at Ethan, laughing as the dog licked his face. He looked at Sarah, her eyes bright with hope and determination. He thought about the empty years, the silence, the slow fade of purpose. "Yes," he said. "You can stay, but only if you let me lower the rent. I won't negotiate on that." Sarah laughed, wiping her eyes. "You're impossible. I've been called worse." As summer approached, Thomas taught Ethan to fish in the creek that ran through the property. They'd sit on the banks for hours talking about everything and nothing. The boy asked about Margaret once, and Thomas found he could talk about her without the old ache. Fondness remained, and love, but the sharp grief had softened. "She would have liked you," Thomas told Ethan. "She always said the best thing in life was good company and honest conversation. I wish I could have met her." "Me too, son, me too." The word, son, slipped out naturally, and Thomas didn't take it back. Ethan beamed. By the time the first year of Sarah and Ethan's residence became the second, then the third, the arrangement had long stopped feeling temporary. The guest house was their home. The ranch was their family's land, in all the ways that mattered. Thomas was 61 now, grayer but more alive than he'd been in years. Sarah was 36, confident and settled in ways she'd never thought possible after Daniel's death. Ethan was 12, tall and lean, already showing signs of the man he'd become. One evening in late autumn, as golden light painted the ranch, Thomas and Sarah stood by the fence, watching Ethan ride Honey across the meadow. "He's good with her," Sarah said. "He's good with everything." "You've raised a fine boy." "We've raised him," Sarah corrected gently. "He talks about you like you're his father, Thomas. He calls you that to his friends." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "I don't want to overstep. Daniel was his father." "Daniel was. And he always will be. But you're his father, too, in a different way. The way that shows up every day. The way that teaches and guides and loves." She took his hand. "And you've been more than a landlord or even a friend to me. You've been my partner in this life we're building." Thomas squeezed her hand, unable to speak. "I'm not saying anything needs to change," Sarah continued. "But I wanted you to know that whatever we call this, friendship, family, home, it's the best thing that's happened to us. And I think maybe to you, too." Thomas found his voice. It is. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Purpose, joy, a reason to look forward, instead of just looking back. They stood together as the sun set, Ethan's laughter carrying on the wind, the ranch settling into evening peace. Thomas Caldwell had thought his story was mostly over, that at 58 the best chapters were behind him. But standing there with Sarah's hand in his, watching Ethan ride across land that now held all their futures, Thomas understood something he'd forgotten in his grief. Life didn't end when you thought it did. Sometimes when you opened your door to kindness, when you offered shelter without expecting return, when you made space for others in your quiet places, life began again. Not the same as before. Better, in its own unexpected way. Different, yes, but full. And warm and home.